Good morning and welcome to Daily Devotions with Pastor Joe. I'm Pastor Joe, and for this morning, we're looking back into the book of Judges at these three judges who have only these handful of verses, only 8 verses, speaking about them in the book. And they were, I suppose you could consider them to be minor judges, though not necessarily. It seems like they, in particular, were blessed by God during their time because they didn't have anybody rising up against them to fight against. They were just judges over Israel to help keep Israel on the straight and narrow and on the right path. So we're going to read these verses, and then at the end I am going to go at least one verse further into chapter 13, just to kind of show what's going on with Israel at this time. Okay. And after him, Ibzan, this is talking about after Jephthah, Ibzan of Bethlehem judged Israel, and he had 30 sons and 30 daughters whom he sent abroad, and took in 30 daughters from abroad for his sons, and he judged Israel 7 years. Then died Ibzan, and was buried at Bethlehem. And after him, Elon, a Zebulonite, judged Israel, and he judged Israel 10 years. And Elon the Zebulonite died and was buried in Aijalon in the country of Zebulun. And after him, Abdon, the son of Hillel, a Pirathonite, judged Israel, and he had 40 sons and 30 nephews that rode on 10 ass colts, and he judged Israel 8 years. And Abdon, the son of Hillel, the Pirathonite, died and was buried in Pirathon in the land of Ephraim in the mount of the Amalekites. And so we have 7 years for Ibzan, 10 years for Elon, 8 years for Abdon. Ibzan died and was buried in Bethlehem. Elon died and buried in Zebulun and in Aijalon in the country of Zebulun. And Abdon, when he died, was buried in Ephraim, in Pirathon in the land of Ephraim, the mount of the Amalekites. Strange little passage here because there's not a whole lot said. They were obviously chosen to be judges over Israel. What the main, two main jobs, I suppose you could say, of the judges was to be military conquest, to help Israel win wars against their enemies. And the second was to keep them straight and narrow, keep them right with God. So I suppose out of everything that they could have been doing, these men, unlike Jephthah, while he did tear down the idols of his father, while he did do some things to bring Israel back to God, he didn't do a whole lot. And you notice that throughout many of the judges. But these ones, most likely, the main thing that they did was try and keep Israel straight, try and keep them right with God. And so 10 and 8 and 7, 25 years between these three. So altogether, across this period of time, there's no political unrest, there's no war, it seems to be a time of peace. Similar to the time of Solomon following after David. There's a time of rest, a time of peace here, where for this 25 years, they had nothing to worry about politically and as far as war goes. Few interesting things. Ibzan had 30 sons and 30 daughters, and he sent his children abroad. He sent them out into the world to find themselves 30 other daughters, 30 wives. And so they went out into the countries, into the world, and found themselves. So maybe they were politically minded. Maybe he sent them out there to make treaties and pacts with the nations around them. Similarly to how Solomon took in so many wives and concubines in order to procure the peace that he did. But so perhaps that's the main thrust behind it. He had 30 sons, and he rose up in the stead of Jephthah and sent out his children to go and be diplomats to the world. That is very possible. But he judged Israel for 7 years. He was reigning over protecting Israel. He was sort of their guardian angel, protecting them for 7 years. When he died and was buried in Bethlehem, which is a very, very special town, Elon rose up and judged Israel for 10 years. And we know nothing more that happened in his life. Maybe it was great. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe he did some mighty things for Israel, but nobody recorded them. We don't know. But of the most mighty thing, he went 10 years reigning over Israel, taking care of them. And so he went quite a long time. I mean, 10 years is a long time to be judging over Israel. And so here he dies and is buried. And then, and kind of not that special of a place at that. And after him, Abdon rises up. Abdon had 40 sons and 30 nephews, which you understand he must have used them, by the way it's reading here, whether it was for work purposes or for, once again, to be diplomats or something, but they rode on donkeys. Wherever they went, and I'm assuming that they were some form of a diplomat in that respect. So he had 70 of them riding on 70 donkeys, and he judged Israel 8 years. And then he died and was buried in the Mount of the Amalekites, which wasn't that the same mountain, possibly that Joshua and Caleb. Caleb would have said, I want to conquer that mountain. It may be the same mountain. I'm not 100% sure. I'd have to look into it a little better. But basically, all I could find in the commentaries and all I can gather on my own is that these 3 judges seem to have lived during a very peaceful period of Israel. They didn't have war. They didn't have trouble. And Israel stayed pretty good and pretty clean before the Lord. And so there wasn't much need for God to send judgment or to allow another nation to come in and do something. And so they did pretty good for 25 years. And then it says in Judges 13:1, and the children of Israel did evil again in the sight of the Lord. And the Lord delivered them into the hand of the Philistines 40 years. And this is once again just that recurring theme that we find over and over and over again, where Israel does really well, and they obey the Lord, and then their judge passes away or quits or whatever happens, and they go away from the Lord, and they go into doing evil in the sight of the Lord, or every man doing what's right in his own eyes. And usually that means idol worship and forgetting the laws of the Lord. And then God has to deliver them into an enemy's hands to remind them that they're leaving him, that they're failing, and that they're going to suffer and hurt as a result of their disobedience. And so here they went for 25 years from the end of Jephthah, who had reigned 6 years. They went 25 years after him of apparent peace. And at the end of this 25 years, they say, hey, we want to do evil again. I mean, yeah, it's a full new generation. You understand, the younger generation of people who were 25 years or younger did not know Jephthah at this time. They didn't even remember what Jephthah had done with fighting against Gilead here, as we read earlier, and fighting against the Ammonites. They didn't know the oppression, the suffering. They didn't remember what Jephthah had done, tearing down that idol in the garden, and how God had won these mighty wars. They hadn't seen anything impressive from the Lord during that 25-year time period. And maybe being raised during that time, not seeing anything great from the Lord, at least in their eyes. I mean, peace is fantastic. Whenever you're an adult and you begin to realize it, peace is fantastic. It's a great blessing from the Lord. But that's all they saw. They didn't see a mighty work. They didn't see any reason to suddenly say, oh, hey, the Lord is working with us and he's on the side of Israel. And so maybe it was just that younger generation of people less than 30 years old, people my age, we would say the millennials, right? I'm right on the cusp of it, 89, but maybe those millennials, so to speak, of their generation would have been rising up and saying, we want to party, you only live once, we want to live like the world, we want to do these things. And so since they hadn't seen any mighty works from the Lord, they strayed from the ways of the Lord. That doesn't explain the older generations, and obviously they would have been doing something as well. Maybe after 25 years without help from the Lord, they had forgotten as well. But I'd like to take this just as sort of an example. Our churches today are failing and falling apart. Our churches are losing people rapidly. Less than 1 in 6. Yeah, less than 1 in 6 of my generation have even stepped into a church. And that's ridiculous. That's sad and miserable. And I wonder if maybe it's because they have never seen anything of the Lord. They've never been told. There's a lot of hungry kids out there, hungry for the gospel, who, whenever you talk to them about it, they're like, wow, that sounds fantastic. Maybe my generation was missed in a large way, and nobody paid enough attention to us, for the most part, enough attention to reach as many as could have been. And I would take that, just verse 1 of chapter 13, as a warning that even though there's a time of peace or even prosperity for the church, be careful not to let down on calling, on reaching out. Keep doing it. Our whole purpose as a church is to reach the lost, is to go out into the world, into the highways and byways, and reach the lost. If we don't, then we do no good. We have no purpose. We don't matter to the kingdom of God, and that's not where we ought to be. We should be doing something great for God's kingdom every day. So it's great to have the time frame of peace like Ibzan, Aijalon, and Abdon, but don't let that time be a time of slack. If you're going through a time where you've got peace and prosperity in your Christian walk and in your church, take the time to consider, okay, what can we do during this time while we don't have the pressure, so we can get up and get moving? You may say, well, our junior church is pretty full. We don't really have room. Well, I'm sure there's something else you can figure out to keep on calling, keep on reaching, maybe even reach others for other churches in the area. You may not fully agree with them, but maybe by those kids getting into another church of any kind, help each other out, band together with the other churches and say, let's reach the lost. Even if your church is busting at the seams with kids, don't let it be a time frame where the gospel isn't being sown in a mighty and a powerful way. Spread the word so that you don't have something like what we are going to see next week, where they did evil again in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord delivered them into the hands of the Philistines for 40 years. It took 40 years before the recovery began to come from a 25-year reign of peace. So be careful. Be careful. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed studying this passage of Judges. I really actually like what I've been able to draw out of this. It was kind of a fantastic little lesson for me in my mind, and I'm definitely going to take it to heart personally. I hope you do the same. Like, comment, subscribe, share this video with a friend. Have a wonderful day in the Lord, and I'll see you tomorrow on another Daily Devotions with Pastor Joe.